Hello, welcome to PodFic Galore. I'm your horrible online reader, Goldscythe. I read adult fanfictions for you busy bees, free of charge and no strings attached. Today I will continue reading the Silmarillion / Lord of the Rings fic from Archive of Our Own by myself, called The Wraith of Himring. I hope you can at least try to enjoy my voice, and I will try my best for you with the equipment available to me. On with the show. The Wraith of Himring by Goldscythe. Chapter 7. A Storm. The storm rose quickly and without a warning. The three Teleri who were casting their nets looked up when the sun suddenly darkened. Oh no, where did that come from? They had set out from their small settlement out to the sea, further out than usual, to get hopefully bigger catches. They needed more to last the winter, for most of the wildlife had fled the forests they were surrounded by. Nothing edible lived in the mountains anymore, at least for their hunters to catch. Life was hard when you lived alongside mortals, but they never complained. Right now, they were casting their nets into new waters, praying Ulmar for plenty. The three, Gwander, Brethilion and Kaidar, had not seen it rising until it was almost upon them. They were off their usual route, the wind pushing them towards the jagged rocks surrounding an island. The heavy clouds released their downpour, and they were starting to fear for their lives.
"We're going to drown at this rate! We're taking in the water!"
Kaidar shouted over the roar of the rain and waves, soaked to the bone in a matter of minutes.
"We have to brave to get to Himling!"
His two companions looked at him with fear in their eyes. It was said a wraith lived in there, tall and terrifying. When they had been young, their mothers had warned them about it. The mortals wouldn't sail anywhere near it.
"If our boat breaks,"
Gwander started. Light brown hair plastered to his face when a gust of wind slapped it at his face where it stuck.
"Roll like the Dark Lord is after you, you fool!"
Brethilion bellowed, and they managed to get their small boat closer and closer to Himling, finding a slope gentle enough to try to jump on and pull their boat up. Together, the three of them managed to get it well wedged between two rocks and tied it to a taller rock for a good measure. Then they began to look for a nook or a cranny to huddle into.
"I can't believe we were caught by surprise by the storm,"
Brethilion growled, angry at himself, wiping his hair from his face when his toe stopped something and brought him to his knees. What he hit wasn't solid ground, but stairs. Worn, but clear slabs of stone fashioned into stairs. Now under the wind, he looked around, using the backs of his hands to wipe his eyes. He took stock of his hands and knees. Scraped, maybe he would bruise, but maybe not. But then he realized they weren't between rocks, but built stone walls. "Melon, are you alright?" "Yeah, I just didn't see the stairs. Let's keep going." Brethilion started to have a feeling they weren't supposed to be there. He hadn't heard of anyone ever living there, yet it felt he was shaken out of his reverie, quite literally, by Kaidar, who pulled him up. They kept advancing further into the ruins of the keep, looking for anything with at least 4 walls and a solid enough ceiling. He was then shoved with Gwen into a room, barren room with nothing in there, but it was dry. Only one wall, surrounding the door, was damaged by time, and the roof seemed sturdy enough. Their backs were soaked as well, but at least they had some food, for the storm raged around the island like the embodiment of wrath. They sat in silence, huddled together for warmth and maybe comfort, cursing their stupidity for not looking at the horizon. "How's here a dwelling? I didn't realize it was a ruin before I literally stumbled upon stairs." Brethilion started after a long silence. "It's huge, like an old keep or something. Was it left by Númenóreans?" "Oh yes, your grandparents were from Doriath," Gwander remembered. They had grown up together from young Ellen. "Yes. They don't talk about anything from ages past. My parents either. Is this an elven keep then?" "This is Himling, one of the high peaks left of Beleriand. Or so my grandnana says," Kaidar explained. "Himling, it sounds sort of familiar." Brethilion rolled the name on his tongue. Someone had mentioned something similar in his youth that he had overheard, but couldn't get it in his mind. "Well, it used to have the fortress of Himring on it. These are the ruins." with Kaidor's words, Gwynder seemed to pale a little. Every Teleri knew the tale. The fortress of Maedhros, the Kinslayer. Oh, Brethilion shuddered. He was probably in a room the blood-soaked sons of Fëanor had been. No wonder it sounded familiar. They fell into silence, and after a brief snack of their soggiest foods, fell into an uneasy sleep. There was nothing dry enough to light fire, but they had to rest. There was nothing much else to do, either tell tales or rest. Brethilion was the first to waken to the sound of gulls. Sun was still behind the clouds, but they were no longer dark, but grey and white, promising better weather. He stretched and took his cloak back onto his shoulders. His dreams had been weird, filled with mournful singing and sobbing. Someone had been begging for forgiveness. It left him with a heartache that wasn't his, and it was unsettling. Someone was suffering from a broken heart, lonely and desperate. He stepped outside to the damp salt air, wandering aimlessly at the lower parts of the ruins. He climbed higher, testing everything so he wouldn't suddenly fall into the jagged rocks and water below. Was it really worth it all? He mumbled to himself. He had heard of the kinslaying and always wondered, were the 3 gems really worth all the bloodshed? Upon stepping onto the highest surviving rampart, he asked it again. Were they really worth the kinslaying? No, they weren't. A quiet voice came from behind him, and for the second time he was making acquaintance with the stones of Himring fortress with his hands, as he spun around too fast and slipped, falling onto his backside. There stood a tall figure, thin like a young tree, heavy cloak around their shoulders, hood drawn up to cover the hair and face. The figure seemed to radiate sadness. "What are you?" Brethilion gasped out his question, trying to scramble backward when the figure shuffled closer. "What do you think I am?" came the harsh but quiet voice, as if speaking was a considerable effort. He had heard the tales of a Wraith wandering the shores. He remembered the tales of the Wraith of Tol Himling, the ever-present guardian of the legends of old, the last remains of Fëanorians. "The Wraith," he replied breathlessly, and as the Wraith took one step closer, he shuffled back a little more, ignoring the stinging in his palms. The scrapes must have opened again. Something cracked, and his eyes flew even wider. Before he knew it, the Wraith had lunged for him, and instead of pushing him down or hurting him, he pulled him close with surprising strength, then both stumbling backward as Brethilion was trying to regain his footing. A piece of the rampart had given away, tumbling into the space below. The Wraith held him by the waist. Very much real. He felt his breathing, and could almost hear the hard pounding against his ribs. He was taller than him. Way taller, and as he stared at the hole he had just sat on, something swung to his field of vision. A frazzled braid, of black, gold, and coppery red. The right arm around his waist held tight and kept pulling him back, and he went along willingly. Blood still roared in his ears, and he clung to the arm, terrified. Slowly he registered the sound of hurried footsteps, recognizing Kaidor and Gwynder by their steps, and was about to open his mouth to call for them when loud shouts registered to his head, and a whooshing sound was followed by something wooden hitting the Wraith's head. He felt the grip loosen, and the figure slumped down immediately. He stumbled and caught himself on the stones, whirling around. He came face to face with his 2 companions, Kaidor holding an oar. They both looked equally furious and terrified. The Wraith lay there on the stones between them, the hood still covering his head, but the 2-tone braid twined with gold was visible, as was a gloved left hand. Otherwise, the dark cloak covered the bony body. "Ivalad, are you all right?" Kaidor asked, panting. "Yes, I'm well. He saved me from the sudden crumbling of the rampart. I hope you didn't slay him." He knelt down, ignoring his friend's cautionary sounds, trying to pull back the hood, but let go as he saw blood trickle onto the stones below. "Uh-oh," Gwynder mumbled and backed away. I didn't mean to hit so hard, but the momentum," Kaidor stammered, backing away, squeezing the oar in a white-knuckled grip. "We cannot leave him here." "I'm not bringing the Wraith into our village," Kaidor cried out. "He lives here, so he is accursed." "I owe him my life!" Brethilion raised his voice, trying to pry back the loose hood, only to find a second hood below it, and it was a surprisingly hard task. It was quite snug and partially pinned down under his head, part of a garment underneath the cloak. The face was scarred and rapidly covered by blood. The edge of an oar had hit between his temple and brow, and upon falling, he seemed to have hit the other side as well. He's no wraith. He's a living being. Head wounds always bleed a lot. He was starting to panic and felt around the top of the hood to see if he had anything special to it and froze. He's an elf. I could feel his ear. He felt along the shell and found a sharp tip. His ears were a little larger and longer he had usually seen among his kin, but figured he must be a Noldo. They had slight differences in looks to them. Pressing his sleeves against the gash, he called out to the elf. Wake up! Please, wake up! He didn't mean to— Brethil, he's not alone. Kaidar sounded choked. He looked up at his friends, who were staring at the other side of the rampart, and he turned to see what had made them paler than their boat. Another tall figure in a dark cloak and hood stood on the other side of the gap, and they could see glimmers of silver from within the hood, red waves spilling from within. We leave. Now, Brethil, hurry! His two friends turned tail and ran. It was an accident! Brethilian tried to explain, but the figure took one slow step towards him, and he realized the gap was crossable with one leap. He didn't want to find out if the figure could do it, and looking at the sharp-featured face covered in blood, he apologized, let go, and ran. On their way down, they heard a cry of anguish chill their spines, and they bothered not with untying the rope, just cutting it and shoving their boat loose, emptying it of water in record time, and once upon the waves, his companions rowed like mad until they were on the shore, exhausted and still terrified, still hearing the keening wails echo from Tol Himling. Brethilian was standing on the shore, ankle-deep in water, staring at his blood-stained hands, feeling guilt eat him up until he passed out on the wet sand, much to the horror of his friends. End of chapter 7. Stay tuned.